So I'm not Pastor Rigo. I'm sure you're all like, wait, Pastor Rigo's right there. No, I'm not Pastor Rigo. For those of you who don't know, my name is TJ. I am the youth pastor here at New Hope. And Pastor Rigo asked me to speak this week because God has really put on my heart, especially for the youth of this church and especially in the city. There's just been a word that's just in my mind for the last about a month, I would say, and that word is depression. And as many people you know, depression really affects not just, I wouldn't say just the individual, but it affects those around the individual as well. And the thing about depression, it doesn't go away if you have money or fame. I think it affects those who do have more fame and money because they think they have it all together, but they don't. And this week, if many of you who have Facebook or read the news or heard, a pastor took his life this past week in California. And lots of questions came about when the news came out. It's like, how could a pastor take his own life knowing that Jesus and God and his relationship is intact? That was a question that came into my head. And then another thing that came in is, what do you think the church people, the congregation feel? If they're saying my pastor can't get through this, how am I supposed to be encouraged? But let me just tell you this, church, that Jesus is the only encourager. Jesus is the only one that can get you through anything. And one thing before I continue is, if you have a friend, or if you don't have a friend, find a best friend to just talk to. And it could be about sports, it could be about anything else, but just have someone that you could just share your heart with. How are you feeling? What are you going through? Why are you feeling this way? And how they can encourage you through the scripture that God is the one that's going to get you through each and everything. So like I said, sadly a pastor did take his life this week. And it was caused because of depression and anxiety. Now I said it did spark lots of questions amongst many people, amongst ministers. And I don't know if you saw on Facebook, I'm so thankful for how great the Christian community is, because I saw a bunch of pastors start sharing how to encourage other pastors, how to go find somebody to share your outlet with. Because sometimes pastors, they like to bottle things up, and before you know it, it explodes. And that's how each and every one of us sometimes handle situations. We bottle things up, and then they just pour out at probably times we don't want to, and it comes out more in anger sometimes than we want it to be. But it's okay, isn't God just good? Because he can take care of all of that and some. So today I want to talk to you about a man named Job. Who's ever read Job before in here? When you read Job, you almost have to feel sorry for the poor guy, right? Like, for those who haven't, I'll share the story. So Job, he was a wealthy man. And in the times of the Bible, the more animals you had just meant how much more wealthy you were than the other person was. So Job had all of this stuff. Job had animals, had sons and daughters. He had a family. He had property. So would you say Job was pretty well off? Would you say Job had it? He was driving Bentleys. He had a mansion. If we're going to put it in today's term, that's what Job was driving. All right, Job wasn't driving a Toyota Camry. I'm just saying. Sorry for anybody who owns a Camry in here. I'm just saying. Job isn't driving one of those. He's driving the high end. He's driving the nice cars. He's living in the nice homes. So Job had it going. Job had everything. But one thing I do want to share, going back before we continue on depression, is for all my teenagers in here. I was reading a statistic that 20% of teenagers are affected by depression by the time they're adults. So mom and dad, hug your kid every once in a while, because sometimes you may not know what's going on. I've heard some stories that I'm like, you're 13, how could you already be going through that? But we have to understand that in today's world, it's a lot different than what I went through. And I don't think I'm that old. I mean, I'm old compared to them, but I don't think I'm that old. But they go through things and they see things at school that I never imagined or ever saw when I was in high school or in middle school. Depression, statistics say, start as the youngest of age of 9 years old. And if you read the news, a 9-year-old did take his life as well this week. A 9-year-old. I was wondering if I was going to get a Ninja Turtle that year as 9 years old. But that just shows you the transformation of this world that we're living in, that today 9-year-olds are worried about who likes them than what toy they're going to get. And suicide caused by depression is the third leading cause of death amongst people between the ages of 10 to 24 years old. Just think of that 14-year gap. It's the third leading cause of death in this nation. So I tell my youth, hug your mom and dad every once in a while. I know they get on your nerves sometimes, but it's okay, because here's the thing. Mom and dad love you enough to hear out your problems. So that's just a free one for you youth students. Go hug your parents after youth. Anyway. Amen. Where all my parents saying amen, come give me a hug. So I want to talk about Job. And like I said, Job was a wealthy man. You know, he was driving the nice cars. He had the nice clothes. He had the nice home. He had all the money you probably could think of. Well, this is how messed up the devil is, but this is how, I won't use the word that was told to me earlier, but this is how dumb the devil is. Because the devil thinks he's in charge. The devil thinks he's in control. So I want everybody to turn to Job chapter 1 with me, verse 6. And what's happening is, like I said, it explains what Job has. Now we're in heaven, and we're at the heavenly court with God, and Satan shows up. So this is what happens. In verse 6, it says, one day the members of the heavenly court came to present themselves before the Lord, and the accuser Satan came with them. Where have you come from? The Lord asked Satan. Satan answered the Lord, I have been patrolling the earth, watching everything that's going on. Then the Lord asked Satan, have you noticed my servant Job? He is the finest man in all the earth. He is blameless, a man of complete integrity. He fears God and stays away from evil. So I want to stop there. That's what God thinks about us. That confidence God has in Job, he has the same confidence in each and every one of us. We may feel down, we may feel weak, but God has all the confidence in the world that he knows that you can get through what you're going through. And this is before even Job goes through anything. That's how much confidence God already has in Job. Before you even start a storm, God already knows the confidence he has in you that you'll get out of this storm. So as the story continues, it says, Satan replied to the Lord, yes, but Job has good reason to fear God. You've always put a wall of protection around him and his home and his property. You have made him prosper in everything he does. Look how rich he is. But reach out and take away everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. All right, you may test him, the Lord said to Satan. Do whatever you want with everything he possesses, but do not harm him physically. So Satan left the Lord's presence. Now, how many of us are like, why would God let Satan do that? Like, Job is doing everything. But I want you to think about this. Satan didn't just get to do it. What did Satan have to do? He had to ask for permission. So in reality, who was really in control of this situation? It's not Satan. And the thing is, many times people think Satan has control of their life, but who's really in control of their life? Because Satan has to go up to heaven and be like, hey, God, can I do this to Job? And God's like, sure. But remember, because God has so much confidence in Job, that Job is going to get out of this situation. So when you first read this, you're like, why would God just let Job? Job is this God-fearing man. Well, then this is what the devil ends up doing to Job. A messenger comes to Job and says, hey, Job, our fields were raided, animals are killed and stolen, our farm hands were killed, and your property is gone. Would you say that's a pretty big blow to yourself, right? Like, oh my gosh, my house is gone, my animals are gone. In today's terms, my cars are gone. Well, that's not just what happens. Another messenger comes and says, hey, Job, all your kids are dead. See, now you really go hug your mom and dad, students. But imagine hearing, you just got the news that all your property's gone, now your kids are dead. I mean, if I was a parent, I think right then and there I'd be pretty much done. Like, it's over. But that's not, more happens. Job's wife tells him to curse God. Our spouses are supposed to, no, I'm not married, I'm just saying. Spouses are supposed to help one another. Imagine hearing your spouse say, curse God because of what's happening to you. Wouldn't that pretty much destroy you? Thinking that you and your spouse are a team, but one thinks that you need to curse God because of what's happening to you. So all this is happening to Job. Now, I don't know if it all happened in one day. The Bible doesn't say, but I'm going to just say it all happened in one day. Because so Job gets all this news. Then that's not enough. The devil goes back to heaven to talk to God again. So it's like, Job's already got enough damage. Why are you going to hurt him more? So this is what happens in chapter 2 of Job. So the devil goes back up to the heavenly courts to talk to God. And God, with the same confidence that he had before, tells the devil, have you seen my servant Job? He's blameless. He's a man of integrity. He fears God and walks away from evil. So then Satan replies in verse 4. It says, Satan replied to the Lord, skin for skin, a man will give up everything he has to save his life. But reach out and take away his health, and he will surely curse you to your face. All right, do with him as you please, the Lord said to Satan, but spare his life. So Satan left the Lord's presence, and he struck Job with terrible boils from head to foot. Who's ever had a boil before in here? Okay, I've had one. They hurt. It feels like something's crawling in your skin where it's at, and it just feels like somebody's been punching you and stabbing you with a little knife over and over and over. But imagine that from head to toe. And you didn't do anything. You're just living your life the way God wants you, but then this happens. But remember, who's in control? Satan had to go what again? He had to ask permission to do this. But it's because God just has so much confidence in Job that Job is going to just get through this. And like I said, God has the same confidence in all of us to get through this. God has the same confidence that he had in Job is the same for each and every one of us. Who says they've been going through a storm lately? Where it just feels like it ain't going to end. It's never going to end. It's just going to keep going. The boat's just going to keep rocking and the waves are going to keep coming. Okay. Now I have another question. Who has, like, friends, or in the youth group, we call them homies? Who has, like, homies that you talk to, you hang out with all the time, or friends? So Job has these friends that show up. But you would think these friends would be encouragers, right? They're like the total opposite. What they begin to tell Job is that, Job, the reason why this is happening is because you're a sinner and it's your fault. And that this is the justice that God's putting on you. How would you feel after everything that's happened, that's what your friends come and tell you? You'd probably just go sit in the back room and start crying and be like, well, I'm useless. I'm not ready to do this. God, I shouldn't be here. Well, that's what Job starts saying. And this is what Job says in chapter 3. And this is Job, like, this is before, okay, let me backtrack a little bit. This is before even Job's friends show up to tell him all that. This is what Job says before that. It says, in chapter 3, verses 1 through 4, it says, at last Job spoke, and he cursed the day of his birth. He said, let the day of my birth be erased, and the night I was conceived. Let that day be turned to darkness. Let it be lost even to God on high, and let no light shine on it. How many of us have ever felt like, man, why was I even born? That's how Job feels. How many of us have ever been in a room and said, God, I don't even want to be here anymore. I'm not doing anything. I'm losing everything. I'm losing my family. I'm losing my house. I'm losing cars. But again, who's in control? Who are we supposed to trust? So Job, he says that, then his friends come and say, well, it's your fault. That's why this is happening to you. And Job just keeps getting beat up, and he keeps complaining. But one thing is, Job never blamed God for what was happening. And he trusted God. Even though he complained, how many of us have ever complained before our God? But you kept the faith and you just kept going. But I mean, I won't lie, I've not blamed God, but I've been like, God, why is this happening? I'm complaining, but God wants you to know that he's in control. And that's what this story is. So as the story goes on, Job's friends are telling him, this is God's justice on you for sinning, for all the sins you're not telling or what's going on. So Job's getting beat up left and right. And how many of us have ever been beat up left and right by friends, family? And it just seems, and it seems like when the enemy gets a hold of you, they just keep drawing you away from people that know the answer. We have so many different outlets. Who has a Facebook in here? Who has a well, I don't know if not many of us have Snapchat, but who has a Snapchat? Instagram, Twitter. We have so many outlets just to like get our thoughts. And it seems like we have 2,000 friends, but we only get like 5 likes on our statuses, and it's like the end of the world. I post a bomb selfie and I get like 1 like, and it's like, I have cat ears on. What's up with this? But that's the thing. We find our self-worth on what social media says instead of what the Bible and what God says about us. And the thing is when you read about Job, I feel like Job was trying to find his self-worth sometimes a little bit in his friends. That he was saying things and hoping that his friends would agree with him. But it's like, why do we run away from God when we should be running to God? Why is it like we're running from so many different outlets, yet we don't run to the solution, which is Jesus? So Job is complaining. I'm a complainer. I don't know if any of you are complainers, but I'm a complainer. And then God shows up. And I love God in this book. Because God straight up tells Job, put on your big boy pants, let's go have a talk. How many of us have ever had that conversation where you're like, oh, it's like you think you're big and bad compared to your dad, and then your dad's like, all right, let's go have a talk real quick. It's like you turn into a little, I'm sorry. But that's what happens. God goes, okay, you want to have a conversation? You want to argue with me? Let's go have a talk. And this is where I love God so much, because God, he's still in control. Just remember that word. God is still in control. He's never lost control of this situation. God knows exactly what's going to happen. And many times in our storms, we think that we need to take control instead of just letting go and letting God take control. We think that as humans, we need to have the guide, on a boat. We need to take the rein, or on a horse. We need to take the reins. No, let God take the reins. Let him steer you in the direction. Is it going to be rocky? Yes. But who's the captain? Who's the one guiding us? It's not me, it's God. So God, he shows up and he tells Job, you want to argue with the Almighty? Like I said, let's have a conversation then. So he begins to tell Job, who put the stars in the sky? And who knows them by name? Who made the oceans and the borders for the ocean? I was talking to my dad this morning in Cabo, right? That the waters recede and you can walk under this bridge, the arch. Every 4 years? Every 4 years. And then after that, there's like water again, like that boats can go through. Now, where does all that water go? Me and my dad, we have a wild imagination. My dad says God comes and like picks it up with his hand and he goes, watch this. Like, I'm going to show off real quick. Check this out. Check this out, y'all. But it makes you question, how do things like that happen? When you look outside, when you leave the church and it's not cloudy, you can see how beautiful our mountains are here. Who made those? So that's what God's telling Job. And when God starts saying that, don't you think you just kind of like shrivel up, like, sorry? But that's what's happening. God's telling him that, like, I'm in charge of this. I'm in charge of this world. I'm fighting your battles with you. You're never alone. So Job's getting all this. And Job chapter 42, verse 2. After God has said everything. This is like probably my favorite verse in this whole book, because this is what God said, or this is what Job says to God. He says, I know that you can do anything and no one can stop you. Remember, God let the devil do this. The devil didn't just get to come do this. Nobody can stop God from doing what he wants to do in your life. The thing is when you look yourself in the mirror every morning, do you see self-worth in the world or self-worth in who God thinks you are? Because going back to Job, God thinks you're blameless. You're a person of integrity. You are a fearful person of God. The thing is Job, after all this, never stopped trusting God in this situation. He questioned God. Who's ever questioned God before? But he never lost trust. And that's been a word for me this whole year, for myself. And you know, when you say trust, like to somebody, you think, oh, it's for you. But then you really think about it, it's more for myself. God gives us words. Sometimes you think for the people or for the person you're talking to. But sometimes if you really look, maybe that's a word that you need for yourself. When Job finally realized, like, God, like, this is you, this isn't me. God blessed Job. But here's the thing. When you read Job, God never gave him an answer of why it happened. And how many of us have ever prayed and God's never given us an answer? Are you willing, are you ready to trust God even if he's never given you an answer before? Are you willing to fight for your family even if God hasn't said this is how it's going to happen? Because we all have maybe a family member who doesn't know who Jesus is. But we need to fight for that person. I love the last song that we sang today. When I'm surrounded, people think like when you're surrounded by something negative. But it's God that's surrounding you. It's God who's fighting those battles for you. It's not something to be so afraid of. It may beat you up a little bit. You may get a little dirt on your knees. You may fall on your face. But who's there to pick you up? Who's there to brush you off and say, hey, I'm right here. Let's keep going. Who's ever learned? I hope we all have learned how to ride a bike in here. Have we? Have we all learned how to ride a bike? No? When you were first learning how to ride a bike without training wheels, what happens? You scrape your knees. If you don't have a helmet, you might hit your head. It's a process. After a couple times, you kind of start learning the balance of it. Then you get good at it. Then you can ride with no hands. Ride with one hand. You look cool. I never learned how to ride with no hands. I'd always fall, so I stopped trying. But it's a process. And that's how it is. You might fall. The enemy might kick you down, but who's there to always pick you up? Because when you learned how to ride a bike, who was the one that kept picking you up? Mom and dad, if they were teaching you, or a brother, or a cousin, or somebody. But they were there to say, hey, get back on, let's go. You might get a little afraid for a little bit. You might, I don't want to do it right now. But you always went back and said, all right, let's try it again. That's how it is with everything. And that's how it is with Jesus. And when you fight your battles, know that you're not alone. And if you've been reading in our I always say prayer, reading cards, we've been reading through the book of Psalms. And as soon as I was studying for this, Psalms chapter 40 came into my head. And I just love it. So this is what Psalms chapter 40 says. I waited patiently for the Lord. God doesn't work as fast as we want him to. But we just got to be a little patient. I tell my students, would you rather have a McDonald's hamburger or a Red Robin hamburger? I think we all know which one we're all going for. I want Red Robin. I mean, if y'all want McDonald's, that's fine. But we have to patiently wait for a hamburger at Red Robin, right? We have to wait for it. At McDonald's, it's like 10 seconds and I have it and I can drive off and go eat. But we have to wait patiently for something so great. It says, he turned to me and heard my cry. Now be honest, when's the last time you actually cried out to God? When's the last time you actually went on your hands and knees and said, God, I can't do this anymore. I can't. This is something that you need to do. And here's the thing, God may not answer, but he's listening. And he's hearing you. And he's in control. Because it continues, he lifted me out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and myrrh. He set my feet on a rock, and he gave me a firm place to stand. God ain't going to give you something wobbly to stand on. He ain't going to let you drown. He's not going to let you sink in the quicksand. What God's going to do is he's going to lift you up and keep pushing you forward and give you a reason to stand and live. I think that's what the enemy does. The enemy knows that if you can get out of this depression, out of this sadness that you're in, that you will finally notice what God can really do in somebody's life and in your life. That if God can get you out of the craziest situation, that that the devil knows, I mean, the devil's dumb, but he's smart enough to know that if you can understand your purpose, that nothing's going to stop you, not even him. And the rest of this, in chapter 40, it says, he put a new song in my mouth, a hymn of praise to our God. Many will see and fear the Lord and put their trust in him. Have you ever noticed when something good happens to somebody, everybody starts celebrating? Somebody gets a new car, everybody's like, oh my gosh, that's so awesome. Let's start rejoicing when somebody gets out of a storm in somebody's life. Because here's the thing, that shows how powerful God is. That shows how mighty God is. And that begins to make other people so curious about, how did you get out of that? How did you do that? Who helped you? And it's like, oh, I know this guy named Jesus. Let me talk to you real quick about him. Lots of conversations start by victories. And victories start with Jesus. When he died on that cross 2,000 years ago for each and every one of us here. I heard a quote that we can't live the life Jesus lived, but Jesus died the death that you and I deserved. We deserved what happened to Jesus, but you know what? The ultimate love is to die for somebody. And that's what Jesus did. And that's why God looks at Job and says, I know it's hard, but I got you. Jesus is looking at each and every one of you. I know life is hard, but I got you. I'm going to ask the worship team in a minute to come sing that last song again. But I don't want us to be quiet when we sing that song. Because it's when I fight my battles, I don't fight them alone. Just close your eyes. You stay there and close your eyes for a moment. And just think, God, when's the last time I really spoke to you about this situation? When's the last time I really needed you? When's the last time I've cried out to you, God, like Job did? I want to finish the story of Job. Just keep your eyes closed. Job was blessed 7 times what was taken from him. He got all his money, all his animals, all his property, his family back. Maybe your blessing isn't that, but maybe your blessing is something. Maybe it's a family member who needs Jesus. Maybe it's something happening between you and your spouse that God just needs to come and intervene for the both of you. God just wants to give you victory. And all you have to do is just begin to worship him. God just wants to fight the battles with you. It's not something to do on your own. It's not something to try to handle by yourself. God's here to be your encourager, your provider, your victor. That's what God is. Just begin to worship him this morning. It's not about time. It's not about where you need to be in the next few moments. What it's about is just being in his presence. What it's about is to feel the victory and the freedom that God's given you. Just like Job. I think Job had every right to be upset. But Job never cursed God. And that's what we need to do. We may lose, we may fall, but God's still there to pick us up. So if I can ask you all to stand this morning.